Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Libby. It is such a joy to be here and to bring these conversations to life. I have wanted to do this for such a long time. There are three pillars to my work: biochemistry, nutrition, and emotions, or you could say mindset. So I look at absolutely everything through those three lenses, and through these conversations, we're going to apply those lenses to lots of different topics. But for this first series, it's all about iron. Sometimes these conversations will simply be me having a chat with you, and then other times I'll invite other people who are experts in their fields onto the couch to have what I hope are some really insightful conversations that bring immense benefits to your world. But either way, I hope these conversations deepen your appreciation of your extraordinary earth suit, because after all, we look after what we care about. Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Libby. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode where we're going to unpack all the reasons why I care so much about iron deficiency and why I'm encouraging you to as well. But before we begin, please know that in this episode, I'm going to offer you some education. I also hope some inspiration, but please know I'm not here to diagnose or prescribe anything. You'll also be very relieved I'm not going to sing, but please know that this episode is not to replace medical advice. When I wrote my book, Fix Iron First, I opened it with a manifesto to declare just how much I care. So I would like to open the episode by sharing that with you. That iron deficiency is the most common nutritional deficiency globally is unacceptable to me. Part of my inspiration is to bring this topic back to the forefront of conversations so that there is far less unnecessary suffering. Too many people live knowingly or unknowingly with iron insufficiency or deficiency, not always aware of the far-reaching consequences of tolerating this deficit. You'll be reminded today how low iron is linked to anxiety for people at any age, right through to significantly contributing to a challenging perimenopausal transition, thyroid issues, brain fog, lousy energy, and an almost endless array of additional signs and symptoms, too often attributed to other causes. Beyond this, though, I want to awaken a movement globally to resolve iron deficiency, particularly for children. Whether they are children with attentive parents who don't know that their youngest is iron deficient, or children who come from hard places and they go to school hungry each day and have very little food security. To those in developing countries with little to no access to iron-rich foods, the tragic impacts of iron deficiency on childhood development are well known. And through my work, I seek to elevate the importance of resolving iron deficiency globally. So some of the reasons I care about iron deficiency, and as I share these, I encourage you to reflect on your own life and the people on your own well-being, the people you love and care about, because I feel my big concern is that iron deficiency is being missed. So one reason I care is for the child who doesn't eat or sleep well because his iron deficiency impedes this. So what we haven't been talking about so much lately is that iron is actually crucial for a child to have a healthy appetite, and it's also crucial for them to be able to sleep well. Iron deficiency is the most common nutritional deficiency globally, and it's as if other nutrients have become trendier. So we hear a lot about the importance of magnesium and vitamin D. Protein is getting a lot of focus right now, so is creatine. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. It's just that we're forgetting the basics. And when it comes to children and their appetite, and as you'll learn in another episode, particularly to do with their cognitive development and their ability to learn, iron plays such a crucial role in all of that. So a major reason I care about iron deficiency is for the children who have restricted their diets in such a way, and yet the people who love those children don't realise that that's a sign of iron deficiency. Now, sleep challenges in children can be caused by all sorts of things, of course. But again, one of the things I think that's being forgotten is iron deficiency. So it's incredibly important to understand if iron deficiency is the driver of those things, because as I say in my work, the road in is the road out. Whatever creates the challenge is the thing we want to address, because when we address the thing that has gone awry, then the challenge resolves. So if a child is iron deficient and their diet has become incredibly restrictive and they're not sleeping well, just as examples, then correcting the iron deficiency can make all the difference to that child's health and happiness right now, but also what their very important future looks like. But we'll go more into detail about children in its own episode. Another reason I care is for the teenage girl whose hair is falling out and who falsely believes she has anxiety when both are symptoms of iron deficiency. Having worked with lots of teenage girls over the years, it's fascinating to me to see, for example, when they come in with a certain set of symptoms and my brain is immediately going to, I think this child is iron deficient, and you raise it and you encourage them to start eating more iron-rich foods, there's often resistance. Then you might do some blood tests to actually show them on a piece of paper that, yes, they are indeed iron deficient to some degree, whether it's iron depletion, iron deficient, or they have full-blown iron deficiency anemia. And there can still be some resistance to dietary change or taking an iron supplement if that's appropriate. But what always fascinates me is that when their hair changes in a way they don't like, then they're motivated to do something about it. So there are many reasons why our hair becomes thinner, and iron deficiency is one of them. And it's incredibly common that I see that in teenage girls. And the way you know that's happening is the part in their hair becomes wider. So they might notice it when they're doing their hair before they go to school, or you might notice it in a photo that the part has become quite wide. So that can be a classic sign of iron deficiency, or its more severe counterpart, iron deficiency anemia. Anxiety is also a symptom of iron deficiency. Now, anxiety can have so many different drivers, but iron deficiency is one of them. And as I said a moment ago, the road in is the road out. So if it's iron deficiency that's driving the anxiety, then correcting the iron deficiency can make all the difference to resolving those symptoms. So again, it's so incredibly common for teenage girls. When they start to menstruate, their iron requirements increase. And so often that's a time in their life where they become even more body conscious. And in response to that, they'll often start to fiddle with their food in some way, restrict it in some way. So whether that's they start to do clean eating, or they start focusing a lot on, it might be cleansers, or they might start to eat in a vegan way, or they start skipping meals. It's really difficult to meet our dietary iron requirements when we're robust, hearty eaters, when we're focused on eating for robust health and energy and for nourishment. And I meet very few teenage girls who eat with that in mind. So when that's happening, it's very difficult for them to eat enough iron through their food. And it's often, as I said, right at a time where their iron requirements have increased because they've started to menstruate. And so iron deficiency developing in those teenage years is incredibly common, and we're missing it. So if you're a teenager and you're hearing this and you feel anxious and your hair's become thinner, you want to have your iron status checked. Or if you're a parent of a child and you think, oh, you're describing my daughter, then I can't encourage you enough to have a conversation with her and encourage her to have some blood tests done so that you can find out if she is indeed deficient. I'll talk more about the psychological impacts of iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia a little bit later in our time together in this episode. Another reason I care is for the athlete who trains so hard and has dedicated their life to excellence, and yet they keep getting sick and they feel sad, and it's all because of low iron. So athletes actually have increased requirements for iron, and we'll talk about that in more detail a little bit later. But when you commit yourself to outstanding performance, when you commit yourself to training really hard to be the best that you can be, to improve your times, to improve your strength, to improve how far you can run, when you're really dedicated to a sport because it uplifts you and it inspires you and you just love the idea of chasing excellence, it's incredibly sad to me that iron deficiency can cut that experience short or cut it off too soon. It might be that you get sick more frequently and so you can't train the way you want to. And because you're not able to pursue your passion, it makes you really sad on the inside. Iron deficiency too can make us feel really cold and grumpy. So you kind of couple all of that together, and if you're not able to pursue your passion, whatever your sport is or however you like to train, and it's iron deficiency driving it, it can really have a lousy impact on our quality of life. So I care very much for the athlete as well who is pursuing that level of excellence. I care for the 30-year-old who has very heavy periods, which is a double-edged sword because this both causes and is contributed to by iron deficiency. So over my years in clinical practice, I can't tell you the number of young women I saw who had really, really lousy challenges with their menstrual cycle, whether they were very heavy, painful periods. It might have been real challenges with mood in the lead up to menstruation or at a consistent time during their cycle. Whatever it was incredibly sad to me that so many of us just tolerate that, thinking that it's normal. I could talk to you underwater about that topic for the next 10 hours, but we won't do that. I'll stay focused on iron deficiency. My point in raising my concerns for the 30-year-old that I'm describing as part of this example as a reason why I care about iron deficiency is she often won't know that she's iron deficient. Or if she does, she might say things to me like, oh, I've always been iron deficient. Or she'll say, I tried to fix it, but the supplements I took made me constipated, which I'll address in another episode as well, because that's a whole can of worms that we're going to unpack. But when she feels incredibly frustrated that maybe she knew about her iron deficiency, but the steps she took to address it didn't work. So she says, well, I just live with it and all of my friends are iron deficient. So it's kind of normal these days, isn't it, that everybody's iron deficient? And I like to say it's common, but it's not normal. We don't want it to be that way because it has such a lousy impact on our quality of life. So iron deficiency, of course, is a result of ongoing heavy periods. But iron deficiency can also contribute to why those periods are heavy in the first place. So addressing iron deficiency for someone who I'm describing is so important because firstly, it can help to lighten the periods. It can be one of the steps in addressing that. And I'll share a case study with you later in our time together in this episode where we can really unpack what that looks like and the steps to take if that one resonates with you. I care as well for the postpartum woman who is doubting herself and she's really missing her resilience because she treasured her resilience so much, and yet she doesn't know that she's iron deficient and the way she's feeling is being significantly contributed to by that iron deficient state. So again, depending on how much blood loss there has been with the birth and also depending on the mother's iron status in that third trimester of pregnancy in particular, so some women give birth in an iron deficient state, and that entire scenario can create almost like a perfect storm, which will be even more challenging if her baby isn't settling well, isn't feeding well, or if the mother has very little support. So we'll dive into more detail about that scenario in particular with one of the experts that I can't wait to introduce you to for a real deep dive conversation around pregnancy and that postpartum time that is so incredibly precious and so important. And again, iron deficiency is being missed and it's having a horrendous impact on a new mother's quality of life. So that'll be a great episode, I hope, for you to tune into. I care as well for the perimenopausal woman whose transition is so debilitating and yet iron deficiency is driving 60% or more of those symptoms. There's a tendency right now for women at midlife when they feel lousy in any kind of way, it's almost like that instantaneous thought is, oh, it must be perimenopause. But when we say something is being driven by perimenopause, what we mean is that the way we feel is being caused by changes in our sex hormones. And I worry that iron deficiency, again, is being missed in that background. So, of course, sex hormones can impact on how we feel and function. But our menopause experience, our perimenopause experience overlays our pre-existing health. So no amount of hormone replacement can address iron deficiency or other metabolic health changes that might be going on as we enter that perimenopausal time in our life. So again, it's another scenario where if we actually address the iron deficiency, I'd be really curious what symptoms were then left over. And there might be some, of course, but they are usually far reduced once we've addressed that iron deficiency. I care about iron deficiency for the person with an underperforming thyroid and all of its lousy consequences, which could be reversed if the iron deficiency was corrected. So a topic that's not talked about nearly enough is the crucial importance of iron for really healthy thyroid hormone production. We literally require iron for an enzyme called thyroid peroxidase, which is crucial in thyroid hormone production. We need iron so that enzyme can allow your thyroid gland to make its hormones. So the two thyroid hormones are T4, which is inactive thyroid hormone, and T3. You also need iron for the enzymatic conversion of T4 into T3. You need selenium for that reaction as well. My point being that when we're iron deficient, our thyroid gland just can't produce its hormones in the way that it is designed to do, in the way that it's perfectly capable of doing. And it also can't generate enough of the active thyroid hormone to give you all of its benefits. Now, every cell in your body has a receptor for thyroid hormones. That's how important thyroid hormones are to the function of every cell inside you. Let's just unpack that concept just for a split second, because it really spins my tires to, I guess, encourage people to reflect on this. It's something I think about every day of my life. If you knew who you truly are, you would be in awe of yourself. You would blow your own mind. And one of the reasons for that is your physical structure is made up of about 50 trillion cells. So 50 trillion tiny little circles. Imagine someone took a pencil and drew a circle. That's a cell. Your structure is made up of about 50 trillion of those. And inside every circle is a city. And inside each city, there's construction going on, but if a building hasn't been used for a while, the body's incredibly efficient, so the little pieces inside the cell can actually pull that building apart. But all of the bricks that made the building that's been pulled apart, they're still perfectly good, and your body doesn't waste anything. So those little bricks can be used for another thing that might need to be constructed, but those things might be on the other side of the cell. And so you actually have little removalist trucks that can drive things around inside your cell and get it from one side to the other. And all of that happens without you having to give any conscious thought to it. Every single circle, every cell in your body also eats food and eliminates waste, just as you as a total human structure consumes food and eliminates waste. So much to do with our health is essentially made up of how well our cells are able to do all of their critical work. And now there are two ways iron plays a major role in the function of all of these cities. And one of them is that every cell needs oxygen, and the only way oxygen gets delivered to the cells, to the cities, is that the oxygen, the hemoglobin carries the iron to deliver the oxygen. So when we're iron deficient, that doesn't happen as efficiently. And the other way is through thyroid hormones, because as I said, every single cell, every city has a receptor on its surface for thyroid hormones. And so all that construction and deconstruction work can't happen as well when those cells aren't getting enough of those thyroid hormones, of which iron plays a crucial role in as well. So it's kind of why iron deficiency symptoms literally affect everything. There's kind of nothing in the body that it doesn't touch. And we're missing it. We're focused on other things. It's a big worry. And when we think about the ripple effect of essentially what I've just described, think about the impact on people's quality of life. Because when we're tired, when we're grumpy, it affects everything. It affects whether we feel like we have the energy to cook dinner for ourselves that night, and instead we might just stop and buy a takeaway on our way home. It affects whether we stay committed to exercising, or even just think about, I'm going to go out in my backyard and water the garden tonight. I'm so tired. I can't be bothered. So it's not just that the garden misses out, but you miss out on those moments outside where you might notice something extraordinary, a bird, or the way the light moves through the trees. And all of those little moments are kind of the big moments. When we feel so lousy because we don't have the energy, or our thyroid's not working as well as it once was, for example, it might affect our self-confidence. So it might affect whether we apply for a new job or a promotion. It might affect our belief in our ability to get an education. So we might think, no, I'm just not that smart, so I'm not even going to try to get into that course. So we don't try for things that we otherwise would if our energy was a bit better. It might affect our self-talk, so the way we speak to the people we love the most in the world as well. So when you stop to think about the ripple effect of essentially what I've just described, it can be pretty major. And I really want to change that. I really want to shine a light on iron deficiency, help people to find out if they are iron deficient. And if they are, I really want to encourage you to act on addressing it. And I hope I can offer you some ways to do that through these episodes. So let's get into some detail. Let's now unpack the ways iron deficiency can present, but also the degrees to which we can be deficient. So the first stage is when we go into what's called a negative iron balance. We often don't notice major symptoms at that point. It's just essentially when we're not eating enough to meet our needs, but our stores have not yet started to drop. The next stage is iron depletion, then iron deficiency, and then the most severe form, iron deficiency anemia. So when we have anemia essentially means a loss or a lack of red blood cells. So there's not enough red blood cells to carry the oxygen around your body for all of its critical work, or those red blood cells might be too small. There might be too many that are too small. So even though red blood cells probably sounds like the world's most boring topic, let's just sit with it for a second because it's really mind-blowing. So every single second, your body is making 2.5 million new red blood cells, and this happens in the bone marrow. So a big part of why we need to eat enough iron is so that it can be delivered to what's called the total iron pool. Now, the food you consume that contains iron and also any iron supplements you have, that all contributes to the total iron pool, but then there's another thing that contributes to the iron that gets to that total iron pool, and that is from dying red blood cells. So your red blood cells, they only live for 120 days, but it's okay because, as I said, every second, 2.5 million new red blood cells are being born, and all of those red blood cells need iron. So as they grow through their life and they're very busy delivering oxygen to all of your tissues and to every cell inside you that needs oxygen, once they get to the end of their life, the iron inside them is still perfectly good. And as I said, the body doesn't waste anything. So that iron gets donated back to your total iron pool so that it's all there ready to be distributed to wherever the iron needs to go. And quite a lot of it needs to be delivered to the bone marrow so that it can be popped into those brand new baby red blood cells so that they're big enough and strong enough to carry the oxygen throughout your body and for all of the processes inside you that depend on that. So when we have anemia, that's when red blood cell numbers and or size have been compromised and there's just not enough of them to do that crucial work. So once we get to essentially iron depletion or iron deficiency, but particularly iron deficiency anemia, we really, really feel it. Some people really notice it though as soon as their levels hit that depletion stage. And we'll talk a little bit more about blood tests in another episode so you can roughly know where you're at with those levels. So some of the ways your earth suit will let you know that it's iron deficient, I'll run through some of those symptoms now. But you'll be able to hear that some of what I describe really overlaps with other things. And so again, it's so easy to miss iron deficiency and just think, oh, it's just because my life's really busy or I'm a bit stressed or I juggle a lot of things. I just have a lot on. So keep in mind also how easy it is to sort of pass what I'm sharing off to just a busy life. So some common symptoms include exhaustion, and obviously that alone has a major impact on our quality of life. Shortness of breath, even more so on an incline. Muscle aches and cramps, a rapid pulse and heart palpitations. So when we have heart palpitations, of course, it's very important to have that check to make sure that there's nothing sinister going on with our heart. And I know so many women in particular who have that done and wonderfully find out that no, there's nothing to be concerned about as far as their cardiovascular function goes. And so the heart palpitations are more like an anxiety. And then we correct the iron deficiency and that goes away, which brings so much comfort to just how comfortable you essentially are in your body. Other symptoms include dizziness, anxiety, as I mentioned, a pale complexion, brain fog, poor memory and concentration. Let me just stop there for a second, because when we talk about brain fog and lousy memory and concentration, again, I really worry that so many people put up with that because they think it's just because they spend too much time on their phone, or, just they watch too many YouTube videos and sort of can't hold attention. And of course, those things are probably contributing to that. But that's sort of what I mean, that it's so easy to just blame aspects of modern life on what we experience, and so therefore we don't investigate them. And if things aren't investigated and we don't know that they're happening, we don't treat them. So that's what I mean, that it's just so often missed, and so much iron deficiency is unknown and therefore unaddressed. Some other symptoms include headaches. Of course, headaches can be caused by all sorts of different things, but iron deficiency is one of them. You feel flat, so you have this real tendency to a low mood. And sure, you may have things in your life that are challenging. You may have genuine pain. You might be grieving. And we so often, we don't necessarily spend enough time really understanding that and having compassion for ourselves when we're going through something like that, or a real transitional time. It might be at the end of a significant relationship, or a child might have moved out of home and you miss them a lot. So I feel we probably don't give enough time to those sort of emotional experiences we might have. So I'm not taking away from any of that. What I want to bring to life is that when we have a tendency to low mood, when there might be those things going on or there might not be, it might just be general life, iron deficiency is not investigated enough. And it needs to be one of the first things we all think about when our mood goes low and starts to kind of stay sort of persistently low. You want to think of low iron and investigate it and treat it if it's there. Another symptom is that we feel cold really easily. So you're kind of the first person to put a jacket or a jumper on when everyone else in the room is still in T-shirts, or you notice that you have cold hands and feet. Women will especially notice this in the lead up to menstruation. You might notice an increased frequency of infections, colds and flus. Your fingernails will change shape as well, particularly when it's anemia. So your nails become very brittle, or they can develop a spoon shape. So at the end, they get a funny dip in them, and that's a classic sign of iron deficiency. Your hair can become very brittle as well. And then, of course, there's hair loss. And you'll notice that we all lose hair, of course, but you notice that it's iron deficiency when the part becomes wider. And you sometimes crave crunching on ice. So I have had patients describe that to me. The minute they say that, I know to investigate iron deficiency. Other women will say it won't be as obvious as I just went to the freezer and literally poured myself a glass of ice so I could have it at my desk and crunch the ice all afternoon, or for as long as it lasted. Sometimes they'll say, I've started putting ice in my glass of wine, and it's more not so that because the wine needs chilling more, it's so I can crunch the ice at the end of it. So again, my mind goes to, I think that's iron deficiency. And another one that I had when I was seeing patients, some women would freeze the nuts they have on hand for snacks. So they loved grabbing it. They didn't want just nuts out of the cupboard or even nuts out of the fridge because they were sort of softer. They wanted the crunch of the nuts, so they'd freeze them and crunch on those. So I would always investigate iron deficiency if someone said that. It's not always going to be a home run answer, but it's pretty consistent, that craving on ice, and it's because the cold has an effect on the width of our blood vessels. You're essentially trying to get more oxygen delivered to your cells by changing your vasoconstriction versus your vasodilation, so opening those blood vessels up. So as I've shared those iron deficiency symptoms with you, let's just pause for a second and think about all of the other experiences or conditions that have symptoms that might overlap with that. And for this episode, I prepared some notes so I could share with you almost so we could have a giggle, but also a bit of I kind of wanted to put that emoji in that where she puts the one where she puts her hand on her forehead, like, oh my goodness, that kind of thing, because it's again, it'll help you see why iron deficiency is getting missed when there's all these symptoms that other conditions it overlaps with. So let's have a look at that now. So how on earth are we supposed to know if it's our thyroid or insulin resistance or iron deficiency, or if our symptoms are related to menopause. And again, you'll see in a moment why testing is actually really important so that we know what has actually gone awry. So here are some symptoms of an underactive thyroid. Fatigue, body fat increases, elevated cholesterol, temperature intolerance, so hot and cold flushes usually. Joint pain, more anxious feelings, low mood, constipation, body aches, irregular periods, heavy periods, hair loss, dry skin, brittle nails, brain fog, and poor memory. That's just such a fun time, hey? Not at all. But there they are. They're the symptoms of an underactive thyroid. Overactive thyroid symptoms, overheating, hot flushes, a racing heart, hair loss, anxious feelings, poor sleep or insomnia, and body aches. Some common symptoms of insulin resistance. Body fat increases, elevated cholesterol, fatigue, heavy periods, and excess androgens. So androgens are essentially male sex hormones. Testosterone is an androgen. Women obviously make testosterone and other androgens as well. And women can have androgens and testosterone inside a really healthy range that fosters all sorts of terrific things for them. But when we have excess androgens, whether it's excess testosterone or an excess of other androgens, it can drive a host of symptoms that we won't like. So excess androgens can drive head hair loss and also the growth of facial hair, particularly darker kind of facial hair, sort of in the places where men would naturally grow a beard. I sometimes giggle and say, and it's not funny, so I really shouldn't giggle, but it's kind of like your eyebrows lose the message that they're supposed to stay in your eyebrows. And at first they move to your upper lip and start to give you a bit of a moustache. And then they think, oh, no, I'm not even happy here. I'll move to your chin. And it's just a good time when you stop at traffic lights and your visor might be down and, yeah, you get the gist. Anyway, it's not fun, is it? But there's information in all of these symptoms. Okay, some symptoms commonly attributed to perimenopause: heavy periods, irregular periods, poor sleep or insomnia, fatigue, body fat increases, brain fog, and hair loss. Symptoms commonly attributed to postmenopause: overheating, anxious feelings, heart racing, low mood, insomnia, elevated cholesterol, and excess androgens. But yet, let's recap with a little summary of common iron deficiency symptoms: fatigue, breathlessness, a racing heart, anxious feelings, you crave ice, poor memory, poor immunity, heavy periods, scant periods, or irregular periods. So again, I guess I want to bring to life the idea that the only way we can really know what has gone awry in us if we have some of those symptoms is to do some blood tests, is to actually do some testing. With hormones, there's different ways to test them, and you want to work with a practitioner who uses testing that they are really confident and comfortable interpreting. So some practitioners prefer to use blood, some saliva, some urine, but obviously with iron, it's a straightforward blood test, and we'll touch on that, as I said, in another episode. So let's now dive into many of the conditions or experiences we might have that are linked to low iron. So firstly, let's look at iron and mood. Now, there's so much that contributes to how we feel and function on a daily basis. And our gut health plays a big role. We understand that the gut-brain axis is a two-way communication street, and we're learning more and more about that, which is so wonderful. I think right now we probably know the tip of the iceberg when it comes to understanding our gut microbiome. But beyond that, of course, as well, our mood is enormously influenced by our neurotransmitters. And some of the key neurotransmitters are called dopamine and GABA and serotonin. So dopamine we need for motivation. And when we are iron deficient, our body literally can't make enough dopamine. So if you think about the way your body would construct a neurotransmitter, think of it almost like making a cake. Definitely a very nutritious cake. Real food, chocolate, beetroot, mud cake. It's definitely got to be a nutritious cake. But imagine that your body is always making cakes inside you. So it needs a recipe to make the cake that is your dopamine. And so ingredients are needed for that cake. And if your body doesn't have all the ingredients to make that cake, then you can't make the cake. It'll be something else. So we need iron. Iron is one of the key ingredients in the dopamine cake. So when we don't have enough iron, the iron will be prioritized usually for red blood cells because every cell in the body needs the oxygen, and dopamine production can be compromised when there's not enough iron to go around. So you might notice it as low mood and low motivation. Another neurotransmitter iron is 100% essential for is the production of GABA. And GABA is our chill pill. It helps us to sleep really well. It helps us to be able to relax. It helps us to be able to allow our parasympathetic nervous system, that beautiful calm arm of the nervous system, to do all of its extraordinary work. So tied up in us being able to sleep well, digest our food well, produce sex hormones in an efficient way and in a balanced way, and to do critical repair work. A lot of that obviously happens while we're asleep. So GABA is such an important neurotransmitter for us to be able to relax. And I meet more and more people who describe they almost feel like their body can't relax these days. And of course, there's many causes for that. There are many drivers to that, but iron deficiency is often not thought of with that health picture. And then, of course, there's serotonin. Serotonin is a beautiful neurotransmitter that helps us to feel really happy, calm, and content. It's not, oh, I want to go out and have a party. It's not that kind of happiness. It's just everything's okay right now, even when there might be things that we are having a hard time with or struggling with. It's almost like, I'm going to be okay with this. It's tricky, but I've got this. So serotonin is a big contributor to that and to mood stability. And iron is needed for serotonin production. Now, the thing with serotonin is we make it in the daytime and it has an antagonistic relationship with melatonin, melatonin being our sleep hormone. So light destroys melatonin. And so obviously the body will make melatonin when the lights are low, but preferably in darkness. And melatonin allows us to fall asleep and stay asleep. And iron is also crucial for us to be able to produce melatonin. And interestingly, what I've heard time and time again, and I don't know why it always surprises me, it's almost like I forget about this part, but when people write to me or tell me that when they corrected their iron deficiency, their sleep improved, it blows my mind. It's such common feedback that we hear when people have addressed their iron deficiency and corrected it. Sleep is one of the things that often dramatically improves. And I'm sure there's many mechanisms involved in that. And this melatonin production is probably one of them. There might be others as well, which I'm not sure about or not familiar with right now, but I'll keep reading about that and I'll come back to you if I find out that there are other mechanisms, but certainly this melatonin production is one of them. So just know essentially that iron is needed for the production of all of those beautiful hormones, neurotransmitters, dopamine, GABA, serotonin, and melatonin. So a study was published in 2023 called The Psychiatric Manifestations of Iron Deficiency Anemia. And the researchers dug in and looked at people with anxiety, with depression, with a condition called ahedonia, which is the inability to experience pleasure. And they looked at the rates of iron deficiency amongst people diagnosed with those conditions, and they were through the roof. And they then set about addressing the iron deficiency for people diagnosed with that. And for some people, their conditions either improved significantly. For some, they completely resolved. And when I read that study, I was very emotional. I was essentially very sad, but I was a bit cranky too. And what it prompts in me is this. It's like my voice wants to get louder. I won't shout right now, but it's the quickest way I can say it is I want to shout it from the rooftops, because there's a tendency right now in our culture to immediately go down a psychological or a psychiatric road when someone's having a hard time. And please don't get me wrong, that might be the perfect road for them. It might be that that's exactly what they need. It's just that I worry that if iron deficiency isn't being tested for, it can so easily be missed. And what if that improved the intensity of those symptoms? What if it meant that the symptoms went from a 9 out of 10 score to a 2 out of 10? Life is way more pleasurable, manageable, enjoyable. It's a whole different life. It's a whole different trajectory in someone's life when it goes from a 9 out of 10 to a 2 out of 10 in intensity with those kinds of symptoms. So it's just that I want it to be front of mind, front of your mind, front of the mind of our health professionals, Given that iron deficiency is the most common nutritional deficiency in the world, when someone presents with symptoms like depression, like anxiety, let's check for iron deficiency and treat it if that's found. Of course, we need to continue to find ways to support people having those experiences, absolutely. But let's check iron deficiency and treat it if we find it. Let's also remember too that iron is crucial for thyroid hormone production. And when our thyroid isn't working well, I think, the quickest way I can say it is we kind of feel cold and grumpy. So the effect of iron on mood is not just directly via those neurotransmitters. It's also happening through an underperforming thyroid when it's not getting enough iron to be able to make its critical hormones the way I described earlier. And then let's just momentarily round back to perimenopause. As I said a moment ago, our pre-existing health is going to overlay our perimenopause experience. And it's fascinating to me right now that there are women who cruise through perimenopause with very mild suffering or no suffering. The only way they know they must be in it is what they've said to me is that their periods have changed. So the pattern of their bleeding has changed. But other than that, they don't know that they're experiencing it. And yet for other women, their perimenopausal transition is incredibly debilitating. So it's incredibly important that we make space for all experiences. At the moment, it's wonderful that the women who are suffering in a really intense way, it's really wonderful that we're having these conversations because more women get the support and the understanding that they so desperately need and that has been missing from this conversation essentially forever. So that's crucial and so important. My worry with that, though, is that I worry for the next generation of women because when I speak to them about perimenopause, they're now terrified of it and they don't need to be. So I'm very curious as to what leads someone to have essentially a breezy or very mild experience through their perimenopausal transition and what leads someone to have a really debilitating experience. Because if our perimenopause experience was solely down to changes in our sex hormones, then I think everyone would suffer, but not everyone is. So there must be other factors contributing to it. And in my clinical experience, iron deficiency is a major one. So many women go into their perimenopausal transition already in an iron deficient state. Some of them have been iron deficient on and off, essentially since they were teenagers, and it's never properly been addressed. Or, I described it earlier, someone might go on to iron supplements, they make them constipated, so they think, I'd rather be iron deficient than constipated, so they don't pursue it. And so they just spend their life in and out of iron deficiency or never really correcting their iron deficiency, never having those robust levels. And because iron, as you've heard, is needed for so much to do with neurotransmitters, thyroid hormone performance, the delivery of oxygen to tissues, because there's kind of nothing that iron deficiency doesn't hit. There's nothing it doesn't touch. When we go into our perimenopausal transition in an iron deficient state, it doesn't just affect our metabolic health, it affects our resilience. And that's another reason why I want to bring this conversation to life, because if you're going through perimenopause and you find out you're iron deficient, I can't encourage you enough to address that. And then it might improve, say, 60% of your symptoms, and then you can treat what's left over. Or you might find that the decrease in suffering is so significant that what you now live with is okay for you. It's kind of like you can handle it. So everyone's different, of course. So all I'm essentially saying is if you're in your perimenopausal transition, or even if you're in the lead up to it, if you're in your 30s and you're worried about it, one of the key ways you can support yourself is to go into perimenopause with really robust iron status. And if you're already in it and you find out you're deficient, I can't encourage you enough to treat it. It was one of the big reasons that I called my book Fix Iron First. So I called it Fix Iron First, and the tagline is the one thing that changes everything, because it has such far-reaching effects. I sort of wanted to encourage people to fix iron first, and then let's see what's left over. So I touched on red blood cells earlier, but here's another little piece of information that I hope inspires you to really address iron deficiency if it's something that you're currently living with. Beyond oxygen transport in the hemoglobin, iron is actually critical inside the mitochondria. Think of mitochondria as the energy production units inside your cells. They're like the little batteries inside your cells. And they're crucial for your body to be able to make its own energy, which biochemically is called adenosine triphosphate or ATP. So essentially, the mitochondria need iron and they need it to be able to make ATP. So when iron is low, no amount of sleep or coffee is going to sort that out. No amount of cold plunging is going to restore that energy if the mitochondria are missing out on iron. So please know this is not in your head, it's in your blood work. Tired doesn't have to be your default setting. I mentioned earlier that athletes often require more iron, and I worry that too many athletes try to do their best performances in an iron deficient state. So iron depletion is incredibly common, particularly in female athletes, but also male athletes, and it can really too easily go missed. It's particularly common in those engaged in endurance and high-intensity training, with some studies actually showing reductions of up to 70% in iron stores compared to the general population. Part of the reason for that is that with all of that training, there is an increased demand for iron, and intensive training raises the body's need for iron to be able to support oxygen transport and energy production. Also too, given it's hard enough across the menstruation years for women to eat enough iron to meet their requirements, which I'll get to that, it's 18 milligrams per day. But when you train, particularly in an endurance way, your requirements we have to multiply that RDI by 1.7. So whatever your RDI is, you multiply it by 1.7 if you are training in an endurance kind of way or if you are an endurance athlete. So it's sort of like, it's very hard to eat that amount of iron, and so quite often supplementation is needed. There can also be some iron lost, obviously, in perspiration. You might also lose some in urine. Some athletes, when they really go hard, when they're really training for a big endurance event, for example, they can have microscopic bleeds. So it might be from their bowels or their bladder. And again, they can so often go unnoticed because it's not like the blood is visible in the stools. You would only find it from a stool test. And so a blood test for iron deficiency is the only way that's going to show up. Now, as far as iron requirements go, the RDI, the recommended dietary intake, is the amount of iron we need to consume to prevent deficiency. Our personal needs, though, within that RDI amount can be highly varied. So, for example, the RDI during breastfeeding is 9 milligrams per day. But if a woman has gone into giving birth already in an iron deficient state, and or if there was significant blood loss during the birth, then 9 milligrams a day won't cut it to get her iron stores back up to a really healthy and robust level. So that's what I mean when I say our personal needs can be highly variable when it comes to obtaining and maintaining great health. The same with really heavy periods. So with the RDI across the menstruation years being 18 milligrams per day, if our periods are really heavy, sometimes we actually need more than that. When it comes to heavy periods, it can be hard to know what's heavy and what's not because it's not something we talk about. We might compare it perhaps with a close friend or chat about it with our mother, and it's really hard to know what's what. So just as a rough guide, a normal amount of blood to lose per period is between 60 to 80 mils, which is about 4 tablespoons. And depending how often you change pads or tampons, it's between about 6 to 12 pads or tampons per period. So that's considered a normal, healthy amount of blood to lose. If it's more than that, it's considered heavy. So every mil of blood has 0.5 milligram of iron in it. So if we lose 60 mils of blood, as we do in a normal period, that's 30 milligrams of iron that we've lost. So that's a big reason why our iron requirements are so much greater across the menstruation years compared to other times in our lives, and also why they're so much more than adult men. If you eat in a vegan or vegetarian way, we need to multiply the RDI by 1.8. And there are numerous reasons for that. One is that all the iron you consume when you eat in a vegan or vegetarian way, it's in the non-heme form, and the bioavailability of that is less than heme iron. Also, too, the reason that RDI needs to be multiplied by 1.8 if you eat vegan or vegetarian is because there are iron absorption inhibitors in a lot of plant foods. And while those compounds like polyphenols, for example, have all sorts of health benefits, one thing that is not great about that is that they can bind to iron. So we need to consume them because they do so many wonderful beneficial things for us, but we want to ideally have them away from foods that contain iron. But with plant foods, they're all wrapped up together. So that's also why the bioavailability of the iron is less when we eat in a purely vegan or vegetarian way, and that's why our requirements are greater if we do that. They're just things to be aware of. So these are just some of the reasons that a real focus on getting enough dietary iron going in on a daily basis is incredibly important, and it's also why for some people supplementation is key to them having robust iron status. So just so all the information is here, I'll run through the RDIs for each age group just so that you've got that information. So requirements for little babies aged between 7 to 12 months is 11 milligrams per day. 1 to 3 years, requirements 9 milligrams per day. For children aged between 4 and 8 years, it's 10 milligrams per day. For those aged 9 to 13, it's 8 milligrams per day. For boys aged 14 to 18, they need 11 milligrams per day, whereas for girls aged 14 to 18, it's 15 milligrams per day. I worry that's not enough, particularly if their periods are really heavy. For women, through those menstruation years or for whatever they're still menstruating, they need 18 milligrams per day. Pregnant women, 27 milligrams per day. Breastfeeding women, 9 milligrams per day. But as I just mentioned, all those reasons, if you go into your breastfeeding time already iron deficient for whatever reason, usually 9 milligrams a day is not enough to restore your levels. In fact, it's just not. Once a woman is postmenopausal, she needs 8 milligrams per day, and 8 milligrams per day is what an adult man requires. So I just wanted to share a case study with you from only about 3 months ago. So the girl I'm talking about, she was 20 years old and she had really heavy, painful periods, and they were also incredibly irregular. So she wasn't in a consistent cycle despite having started menstruation at age 12. She had known iron deficiency anemia, and she'd had that since she was 15. She'd tried some supplements, but they constipated her and she didn't like that, so she didn't do that consistently. And that is just such a common story that I hear. So I wanted to address not just her iron deficiency, but also her painful, heavy periods as well, because obviously if we can make the bleeding less intense, her iron status will improve just on its own. Of course, we still need to do dietary changes, supplementation, but we take that constant loss of iron, we decrease that obviously if we can make the periods less heavy. So I suggested that she trial a super strict dairy-free way of eating to see if that made a difference, and there were a few reasons for that. Number one, she had a history of recurring streptococcus-based infections. For her, it was ear infections. And in my books, I explain the detail of why, when someone has that history, why I ask them to do a dairy-free trial. So I won't go into the detail of that now. But also I have seen a super strict dairy-free way of eating make a significant difference to lots and lots of women of all different ages when they have heavy, painful periods. I suggested she take BioBlend Cycle Essentials to help the pituitary communicate with the ovaries to see if we could get ovulation happening in a more cyclical way. And I also encouraged her to take Iconic Iron, the ferritin iron with cofactors supplement that I developed over the last 5 years. And after 3 months, not only did her periods lighten and fall into a 29-day pattern, but the bleed gave her no pain. It wasn't just, it's less, I can definitely notice it's less. She said to me, there is no pain. How on earth is this possible? And of course, her iron status dramatically improved. There was less heavy bleeding, but also she was using Iconic Iron. Her ferritin went from 12 to 45 micrograms per litre. She looked and felt like a completely different person. What she thought was anxiety was iron deficiency. And it completely resolved once she was ovulating cyclically and her iron had improved. So I want to encourage you to ponder all of that and consider how all of these improvements essentially change the course of this young woman's life. I was so touched and moved witnessing the change in her face and her energy and her disposition from when I first met her to 3 months down the track. It was really astonishing. So I share that case study with you to reflect on your own life and to also remind you and encourage you that you don't have to put up with iron deficiency. It can be resolved and it can make such a difference to how you feel and function each day. So I mentioned iconic iron. I'll go into detail about why I love it so much and why it's making such a difference in people's lives. I'll do that in a separate episode. But for now, thank you so much for joining me. I really hope that you have learned something in this episode and that there's something that's bubbled to the surface for you that you're going to take action on, because it's taking you actions that enhances the quality of our lives. So I hope you'll join me for another episode of Conversations with Dr. Libby. Thanks for being here for this one.